Welcome to r/NuclearRevenge. Ex-husband gets what he deserves after he cheats on my sister. Hey y'all. From the title, this story isn't about me but my sister. Well, sort of. I'm an only child, but grew alongside plenty of cousins whom I consider my siblings. For some clarifications, this story takes place in a third world country in Asia. Laws are different here from other first world and western countries. This took place in the Philippines. Our country is a conservative and Catholic country, so marriage and married life is held sacred, and any idea of divorce or separation of spouses is frowned upon by most traditionalists. We are basically the island version of Texas and Alabama, where there's lots of hardcore Bible thumpers. This story happened a few years ago, when I was about to go to college. My cousin and her husband had been married for a year or so by then, but haven't had much success in conceiving a child. We live in a Southeast Asian country and surrogacy isn't legal for some reason, so that option was not in the cards for them. They talked about adopting, but both of them really wanted a child of their own. Anyway, after a few months more of trying, they decided to just postpone it for a while, considering they are still young as both are in their early 30s. Contrary to popular belief, women can still get pregnant at 30 until 39. 40 is the high-risk slim chance age. They instead decided to focus on their respective careers and travel whenever possible. All in all, they were having a great life. On the outside, that is. About a few months later, my sister noticed a few things, nothing too drastic. Like her husband would receive these late night calls. Husband is a doctor, and he would go to the other room to take it. Her husband always clearing the history in their shared desktop computer at home. Him having to go over time way too often. Sister asked me and some of our cousins on what to do. At the time I was dating a guy pretty tech savvy, who on multiple occasions hacked my Facebook, but that is for another story, so I asked him for help. Within 2 days we had his Facebook, mail and Instagram account. We found nothing. I thought, okay, weird, maybe my sister is being paranoid. Then I had a thought, what about his Viber? After a bit more digging we were able to get hold of his Viber, and boy did we find things. This asshole has been cheating on her for almost half a year. We found dozens and dozens of messages between him and some girl. In one of the messages the girl even admits that, even though he is married, she loves him and likes the thrill of being with a married man. It made me and my boyfriend then sick. The girl was just a few years older than me, in her early 20s. They're even exchanging nudes with each other and talking about their little sexual rendezvous. I was absolutely heartbroken. My older sister always wanted a family of her own, and this ass whom she thought was the love of her life had just did this to her. I told my boyfriend to save all of it in a hard drive and log out the accounts. I was hesitant at first to tell my sister, but I knew she deserved the truth. A few days after debating it with myself, I finally showed her everything. As expected, this broke her. She cried and cried. I was crying along with her as I didn't really like seeing her like this. After hours of both of us sobbing, I decided to get her to get revenge. My sister was never the vindictive type. She was often the timid girl who let people get away with everything because she didn't like confrontation. She was heavily bullied for this during her school years, according to our other cousins that were her age. The revenge. I told my sister of my plan. Now she wasn't really planning on revenge, she wanted to just file for an annulment. Divorce isn't legal here too, but I knew someone had to teach that jerk not to mess with our family. I told her to pretend everything was okay and that she was oblivious to his cheating. It took a good amount of coaxing, but she finally agreed. I decided we needed to catch them in the act, because despite the overwhelming evidence, I had a hunch they would deny it. A week later my sister called me and told me that her husband messaged her from his work. He told her that he might work overtime again at the hospital and would just be sleeping at their condo that was about 10 minutes away. She said sure and called me almost immediately. I smiled and told my sister to meet me at the restaurant across the condominium where her husband would be. I arrived there alone and waited for my sister. A few minutes later she arrived. Lucky for us, their condo unit was outfitted with CCTV cameras you can view on your phone/tablet/computer. Husband was not fully aware of this, since when they got the condo, it was my sister who took care of outfitting the unit with furniture and stuff. He only signed the paperwork with her at the beginning and rarely had a hand in it. It was supposed to be a rental unit, but husband convinced my sister to let him use it when he would need overtime at work, so he can just sleep there and not have to drive the 1-hour journey he had to take to get to their house. We viewed the footage as we were sitting down having some drinks. Nothing yet. Husband wasn't there. An hour passed, and we see the front door open, and in walks husband with his mistress. What is good about the CCTV though was that it had an audio function, so we can hear their full-blown noises while they were shagging. At that moment my sister was about to cry, but I told her that he wasn't worth it, and it's time to confront them. We went to the unit and sneaked inside using my sister's key. They were in the bedroom still getting it on, and I slammed the door open to see them doing it. Horrible mental picture. To say that these bastards were shocked would be an understatement. Their jaws were literally on the floor when they saw us. He tried explaining and rationalizing the situation, but I cut him off. I told him to shut up and prepare for a lawsuit. My sister was in tears at this point, and I had to drag her away as her douchebag of a husband was pleading. We drove to her home and packed all his shit up in boxes and his bags. The drive home was not pleasant as my sister was still bawling. I comforted her as best I can and told her she would be okay. He got home just a few minutes after we were done packing. She told him that he can't live in the house anymore and that she was leaving him. He said nothing, knowing my temper and the fact that if he tried lying I would have his head then and there, and loaded his things in his car. The next day I got the evidence from the hard drive and sent it to the board of directors of the hospital he worked in, the medical board, all his colleagues, friends, and family. I also sent out the evidence to the woman's family, friends, and to her boss and colleagues. The fallout was glorious. They both lost their jobs. Husband even had his license revoked, and his parents disowned him. One of our cousins was a lawyer and he helped our sister sue him and the woman for concubinage, PH legal term for adultery. She won the case and was granted an annulment, and she got most of their assets in the separation: the house, the condo, cars, and money. Her husband got a bit of money, but he had to pay a hefty price for the lawyer since his parents refused to help him. I don't recall how many years they had to serve in jail, but since neither can afford bail, they would be spending a lot of time in a facility and have a permanent criminal record when they get out of jail. My sister is fine now. She's still healing from all that bullshit and is in a better headspace now. 5 years of child abuse. A lifetime of hell on earth. Not my story, but a very close friend of mine who told me this. He was sexually abused by his stepfather ever since he was 6 and was violated around his 8th year. His biological father died of a work-related accident and his mother married this stepfather that she knew from her hometown a few years after. That fatherly figure soon turned out to be an abusive monster that was oh so eager to put his hands on anything that moves. His mother didn't know of the sexual abuse that he was going through because the son was threatened by death of his mother and him if he says anything. He was in an ever worse situation. After getting bullied and abused, he was completely suicidal. He was debating on just jumping in front of a semi and end it all multiple times, but his mother was the only reason he didn't want to do it and kept pushing on through it all. He started slowly making a few friends that helped him cope a little. On his 10th he was violently molested and was left limping after his father went all out on him. He was forced to go to school the day after and was limping from the pain, unable to sit at all, unable to move, but he endured it and shrugged it off as an accident so that no one finds out what happens. He saw what the man can do. He doesn't want his mother hurt or worse because he told on this monster. Even the bullies stopped making fun of him after seeing that he didn't care anymore about what they did to him. More uninterested in bullying an inanimate object than pity. A few older senior students who were a mix of 16 and 18-year-old caught up to what happened and pulled him aside one day to ask what happened. They all sat down and talked. Although they knew what was happening, they merely asked to confirm what's going on. My friend who told them to not spread it as it means life and death to him, and especially his mother, let out all the information out of pure fear from about 5 or 6 behemoths towering around him, and years of abuse killing his self-esteem. The seniors were not amused, not one bit. They were all hellbent on making this man regret his life choices, and make him regret it they did. They stalked him, cornered him, and afterwards went completely berserk on him, sodomized him with a multitude of tools, carved child rapist on his back, beat the bejesus out of his testicles to the point where he was quite literally peeing blood, and continued beating him up in the process and afterwards just to really nail the point in. They didn't want him to die, they wanted him to live and suffer from it. He was rushed to the hospital with both his arms broken on multiple points, eye socket collapsed, and eye heavily damaged with no chance of repair. Both his testicles were ruptured and are damaged beyond salvation. His anus was ripped to the size of a 22 centimeter ball, and he lost about 70% of his teeth. There was more, but it will take this whole post just to list all the damage dealt. They caught him at the brink of death from all the bleeding, and managed to keep him alive somehow. The next day they told his mom of what happened, and what he did to him. She wasn't just filing for divorce, she took everything he ever owned, all the money he made, and afterwards had him put behind bars, with a little birdie that told every inmate inside of what he did. Last he heard of him was that he was being used quite literally as the prison soap dispenser while in the pen. He didn't die, but he was left with a gait that would make even hot Kinky Joe jealous, roaming the streets, shunned by everyone, and they still regularly tell people of who he is and what he did to publicly shame him for what he did, losing him any job possible, and barred from many establishments, and was regularly stoned, hissed at and yelled at to go away like a stray dog. There was no mercy for him. My friend now is 26 years old, works in a decent place where he is beyond respected, his mother living with him, still single sadly, but he is now living a better life than what he had when he was a kid. He left the country where all of this happened with his mother and started working and studying, and now lives a more or less easier life, working as a vice principal in the nursery I work in despite his history. Evil stepfather. When I was 15, my mom started dating a man she met on a dating website. I didn't like him the first time I met him, and 2 months later he moved into the house. About 3 weeks after he moved in, he took my skateboards, self-built half-pipe, ramps, BMX bike, ice hockey gear, and many other things to the dump one day while I was at school. He said he did this because he didn't want all of my crap cluttering up his garage. Maybe 2 months later he punched me in the stomach for the first time because I got up from the dinner table without asking to be excused. From there it has escalated into full-fledged beatdowns for the smallest perceived slight to his authority. One day he decided to take my extensive Pokemon card collection, even more extensive comic book collection, my Game Boy and PS2 with all the assorted games, and my fantasy and sci-fi book collection, and got rid of it all, because 15-year-old boys should be playing football and baseball, not being a ref or nerd playing with Pokemon cards, and reading comics and books. I would like to add that he was a middle school teacher, and then his off-time refereed and umpired local middle and high school sports games. My mom never intervened, and in fact, acquiesced when he demanded that she stop giving me lunch money, because the little shit will just spend it on comics and other gay shit. One day, I took maybe $3 and change out of his change jar so that I can buy a slice of pizza and some fruit punch during lunch at school, because I was tired of being hungry. My twin sister was always a bit of a butthole and frequently blackmailed me into doing her chores from a young age. I was fed up and refused to do something, so she told him what I had done. This man actually called the police and pressed a larceny charge against me, and once the police had left, beat me senseless. At that point I ran away. When the cops found me and returned me to my home, I found out that I've been trying to talk my mom into sending me away to military school or something of that nature. I ran away again and between having run away several times and the larceny charge ended up turning 16 in juvenile detention. I spent the next couple years miserable and afraid, frequently contemplating suicide. Once I left home, I didn't speak to my mom for several years. We eventually reconciled, and by that point they had married. I was a lot bigger than I had been as a young teenager, and had gotten into weightlifting. So he no longer acted like he was going to punch me to make me flinch, much less actually hit me, and we basically avoided each other for the most part. My mother found out that she had stage 4 cancer and no longer wanted to waste any of the time she had left with him, so she had a lawyer draft up a separation agreement whereby he would receive a set amount of money upon separation and would have 45 days to retrieve his belongings from the house. He had spent his entire inheritance in 6 months and then had to sell his mother's house that he grew up in order to settle his debts shortly before they started dating. And my mother bought the house back from the bank before they married. She allowed him to keep the house and he moved back into his mother's house. My mother passed away about 9 months after their separation, and despite the agreement, have been allowing him to come and get his stuff piecemeal. I put an immediate end to that. I sold his baseball card collection, around 14k, and his autograph sports memorabilia, roughly 11k, and also sold all of his woodworking equipment, along with several finished pieces of furniture that he had made, $6,500 I think. I kept his mother's engagement ring, platinum band 3 diamonds roughly 2 carats, wedding band, his coin collection. I also collect coins, and some tools and other odds and ends. Around a month ago I ran into him at the grocery store. I told him what I had done as he was pushing his cart out towards his car and he took a swing at me multiple times. Several of these punches missed and the ones that they connect didn't have much effect because he's nowhere near as strong as he was 20 years ago in his 40s, and I'm no longer a skinny little 15-year-old. He continued to try to punch me as I called 911. And was actively ramming his grocery cart into my new Toyota as the police officers pulled into the parking lot. He was arrested for assault, communicating threats, and destruction of property. As a result he lost his job and pension at the local middle school, and because he had never learned how to save money while married to my somewhat wealthy mother ended up having to sell his mother's house because he hired an expensive lawyer thinking he could somehow beat the charges. My nephew, who was on the football team, made it well known to his friends that he not only had just been arrested and convicted of assault as well as other charges, but that he had also beat me as a child, caused several parents to call for him to resign from refereeing and umpiring for local sports games. My niece and my girlfriend's much younger sister are enrolled at the middle school where he worked, and say that he was not only universally disliked, but when he came up to the school to get his belongings, he made a big scene and ended up hysterically crying as he was leaving. At least that's what they've heard from the kids who were attending summer school at the time. His son, who he was equally abusive towards as a child, refused to take him in or help him out, so he ended up having to take a job as a cashier at Walmart so that he could afford the rent on his crappy little trailer in an absolutely awful neighborhood. Even though that Walmart is not the closest Walmart to my house, that is now the only place where I go grocery shopping or to purchase anything that I need. I purposely stand in line longer than I need to, just so that he can be the one who has the pleasure of ringing up my purchases. The first time I went through his line he attempted to ring up multiple items more than one time to overcharge me, and when I called him on it said that I was mistaken. I asked for a manager, and the manager believed him that it was an accident, but he learned that he can't get away with that. The second time, I made sure to be as nice as possible and how to ask for a manager because he was overwhelmingly rude. The people in line behind me backed me up, and he got in some trouble for that. Every time I go there and step into line, I see him die a little bit inside, and it may be petty, but it gives me such satisfaction. Sometimes I'll say that I'm paying with exact change, and as I'm about to hand him the money I'll say, "Oh, I didn't realize I had rare coin from his collection in my pocket. I guess I'll pay cash." I just sold his expensive ratcheting wrench set, and so on Monday, When he works again I'm going to go buy my daughter one of their better above ground pools, and as he's ringing it out tell him I know that your daughter is just going to love this pool. It's not like I would have ever used those expensive ratcheting wrenches anyway. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for daily revenge stories.